Okay, boys, I am really sorry about the delay. I have your of course your grade since a long time ago, but I haven't uploaded this video. And before giving you your grades, it is important that you are able to know what were your mistakes. So here are the correct answers. I had already answered some of them, just this page, but the others one we will solve them together. Is that I was already recording this video and I realized that I wasn't recording the audio, so we already have these answers, but don't worry. So in this century, Theodoric killed Odoacer, founding the Visigothic Kingdom in Italy, and took control over the throne of the Visigothic Kingdom after Alaric II died in the battle against Clovis. So this is the 6th century. If you remember, this is actually the century in which the Visigoths start to grow a lot. By the end of the 5th century, they are settling as a kingdom. But by the 6th century, they are growing a lot as kingdoms. Don Rodrigo seizes the Visigothic Kingdom by the end of this century. Remember, this is actually one of the last things that happens during the 7th century, because by the year 711, Islam is going to enter Europe, and this is going to mark the start of the 8th century. So the answer would be 7th century. This century may be thought of as the century of the Visigoths, as they sacked Rome, defeated Attila, and founded their kingdom in Spain. Remember, this was very easy because if you remember that it was in the 5th century when the Visigoths sacked Rome. Well, you already have your answer, 5th century. During this century, the famous Battle of Roncesvalles depicted in the Song of Roldan. This is the 8th century. Remember, just before Charlemagne was crowned emperor, which would mark the end of the 8th century and the beginning of the 9th century. This century may be thought of as the century of Islam, as it saw the birth and expansion. Sorry, in here is a mistake. It should say and expansion of such religion. This is the 7th century. The 7th century is clearly the century. If you look at your cards, it is basically the expansion of Islam, the century. This century starts with the entry of Islam to Spain, as we have already said in this question about Don Rodrigo. Here, Don Rodrigo is the last thing that happens in the 7th century. So by the entry of Islam to Spain, it would be the beginning of the 8th century. During this century, combined troops from Eastern and Western Roman empires failed to defeat the Vandals, which had to control over Carthage in northern Africa. Well, this is obviously the 5th century. Why? Because we still have a Western Roman Empire. After the 5th century, we won't have a Western Roman Empire anymore. So if we still have both Roman empires, the Eastern and the Western, this is obviously the 5th century. Then the next exercise was to point out the beginning and the end of the century, so that is the S1 and the S2. The beginning of the 7th century, if you remember, would be Alaric Odoacer deposes Romulus, Clovis defeats Syagrus. No. Wait a second, I don't see it. The 7th century ends with the defeat of Don Rodrigo, and it starts with here. Muhammad receives the message from Archangel Gabriel, the birth of Islam. That is the beginning and the end of the 7th century. Remember that the 7th century will mostly be the expansion of Islam. I am sorry because the questions change order, but the beginning is obviously this one. The expansion of Islam, the birth and expansion of Islam, and the entry of Islam to Europe would be the end and beginning of the 8th. The 8th, as we were saying, is Don Rodrigo is defeated, so it is the entry of Islam to Spain, and the end is the Charlemagne crowned as emperor by the Pope. This is going to mark the end of the 8th century. So this would be the answers. Then the last is the difficult one, let's say. It is not difficult, but the thing is that it is not enough just to memorize for this exercise. For the previous exercises, you could just memorize, but for this one, you have to think a lot. So explain what was the status of most of the foederati by the end of the 5th and the beginning of the 6th century. Well, this is an easy one, because if you remember, this is the moment in which they become kingdoms. if you remember, the Foederati are going to become what we call the barbarian kingdoms. So, barbarian kingdoms, instead of being tribes that are going to be working for the Roman Empire, they are going to become their own kingdoms. Then explain the relation between Clovis and the Visigothic Kingdom. Well, if you remember, Clovis was the first king of the Franks, so expanded Clovis expanded the territories of the Franks, defeating the Visigoths and killing the king. It is Alaric the second. The second. So that is the relation. Clovis caused, well, he expanded towards the kingdom of the Visigoths. The king Alaric II died in this battle, and very importantly here, this is going to cause both Gothic kingdoms. This is both the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. Ostrogoths and Visigoths are going to unite under the rule of King Theodoric the Great. Theodoric the Great. Okay, that would be the relation. As Clovis is expanding towards Spain, he's going to cause the death of King Alaric II, and this is going to cause the birth of this huge kingdom that is going to be ruled by Theodoric the Great, at least until his nephew, which was the rightful heir of this kingdom, of the Visigothic Kingdom, is able to rule, because he was just a little kid. Then, how did the Carolingians won enough power to depose the Merovingians from the throne of the Frankish kingdom? Well, this started when Charles Martel defeated the Muslims in the battle of Poitiers, because this gave them enough power to military power and let's say name, to become the actual rulers of France. Instead, they are going to be replacing the Merovingians, which is the ruling family to which Clovis belonged. So now we have the Carolingians, and very importantly here, we're going to have Pippin. Pippin is going to be, of course, the son of Charles Martel, and the father of Charlemagne is going to be the first Carolingian king. Charles Martel is not going to be the king. He's going to be exercising full power, but he's not going to be crowned king. The first king is going to be Pippin the First, and he's going to be the first king, and then, of course, Charlemagne, his son, is going to become the Roman emperor again. Then explain the relations between Carolingians and the Pope. Well, of course, they were in very good terms. So the thing is that the Carolingians defeated the Lombards in Italy, giving the territories of Rome to the Pope. And this was achieved by Charlemagne, right? Charlemagne. However, his father, Pippin, is going to be giving. Sorry about the dogs. I don't know what is happening in the street. Pippin is going to be giving the Pippin's donation to the Pope. And remember that this is the document in which these lands are going to be rightfully or legally given to the Pope, because the previous donation that they used to convince Pippin, that is the Constantine's donation, that was a fake document, the most famous fake document of the Middle Ages. Then explain the relation between the object of study of history, the doing of man within time, and the century of unit of analysis. Well, the thing is that the century is the unit which allows us, which allows us to study the processes of social activity, which are the subject of, or the result, let's say, of the doing of men within time. So if the object of study is all these social products and the transformations are going to be happening in time, why are these processes? Well, because usually structures are transformed within the century. So this is going to allow us to study these processes, because if you remember, processes are these transformations, and these structures, of course, are the products of social activity. So that is the relation that the century is going to be the accurate, let's say, scale of observation, which will allow us to observe the processes and all the changes. So this would be the right answers, boys. Please check this video out, pay a lot of attention, because this will allow you to know what were your mistakes and what were your of course your points in favor. So after you do that, by night I will send you your notes. I already have your notes. Most of you did well. Some of you, I think that you are having problems studying, because even if you have your notes complete, and even if you think that you're working correctly, there is knowledge is not getting in a proper way into you. There are still some confusions there, but in general you did quite well, actually. So I will be letting you know your grades by the end of the day, but first please watch carefully this video, okay, boys? So thank you and bye.